Some betrayals arrive from strangers, but the most devastating ones are orchestrated by those who know exactly how to break you. Emily Carter lived this reality in the heart of Chicago. After her parents passed, she became the anchor. She worked double shifts, banked every spare dollar, and managed the household, all to ensure Lily had a future. Sophie, her best friend since childhood, was the constant shadow in that life. Emily provided the stability, and Sophie provided the encouragement. They were a closed circle. Emily shielded her sister from every hardship, believing that as long as she kept working, kept saving, and kept watching, the life they built together would remain secure. She never questioned the access she granted them. She never checked the logs. To Emily, the trust was as solid as the floor beneath her feet. She spent years building a sanctuary for the people she loved most, completely unaware that she was not just providing for them, but handing them the tools to dismantle her entire existence. She was the architect of her own ruin, blinded by the very devotion that defined her. Daniel Hayes did not care for small talk. He was a quiet financial auditor who spoke in numbers and observed patterns that others ignored. He sat across from Emily, his finger resting on a column of figures that defied logic. He pointed to a series of recurring, unauthorized withdrawals. Each transaction was small, designed to bypass alerts, but they were persistent. Emily leaned in, her brow furrowed as she scanned the digital logs. She pulled up the user permissions list. The names were there, right at the top: Lily and Sophie. She had granted them access years ago as a gesture of absolute trust. Now, those same permissions were being used to drain her savings account by account. The silence in the room stretched thin. Emily checked the transfer dates against the moments she had been working late shifts, providing for them. Every time she had sacrificed, they had taken. Her hands hovered over the keyboard. She did not cry. She did not shout. She simply watched the screen as the evidence of a systematic theft solidified into a cold, undeniable reality. The sanctuary she had built was being dismantled from the inside out, and the people she protected were the ones holding the crowbars. The front door was unlocked. Emily pushed it open, expecting the usual evening noise, but the living room was unnaturally still. She stepped into the hallway, the floorboards silent under her weight. Then came the murmur of voices. She moved into the shadows near the kitchen doorway. Lily and Sophie were seated at the dining table, their posture relaxed, predatory. A stranger sat between them, a leather briefcase open, documents spread across the wood like a map of her life. Sophie spoke first, her voice smooth, devoid of hesitation. Once everything transfers, it is done. The home, the accounts, the titles. She will never know. Lily laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. She will never notice. She trusts us too much. Emily leaned against the wall, her breath shallow and controlled. They were not just stealing money. They were using a legal professional to systematically strip her of her home, her assets, and her very identity. The shock hit her, cold and absolute, but it lasted only a second. As she watched them sign away her future, the grief vanished. It was replaced by a sharp, cutting clarity. She did not confront them. She did not scream. She simply turned around and walked back into the night, her mind already moving faster than theirs ever could. The meeting place was a quiet corner of a public library, far from the reach of prying eyes. Emily waited until the clock struck noon, her posture rigid, her focus locked on the door. When Daniel arrived, he did not offer sympathy. He placed a thick folder on the table and slid it toward her. It contained the blueprints of the legal trap Lily and Sophie had constructed. Emily flipped through the pages, seeing her own future being carved into pieces by those she had raised and supported. She looked up, her gaze steady, searching for a way out. Daniel tapped the document. "They did not just betray you," he said, his voice low and clinical. "They built an entire system around you, designed to make your life their property." He gestured to the complex web of shell accounts and forged signatures. "If you fight them directly, they win. The system is rigged." Emily felt the weight of the paper under her fingertips, but the fear was gone. She asked the only question that mattered. "Then how do we collapse it?" Daniel leaned in, his expression sharpening. "We do not break them. We let their own system collapse under the weight of its own greed. The plan was laid out in the silence between them. It was not a defense. It was a counterattack. The performance began the moment Emily stepped through the front door. She softened her posture, dimmed the fire in her eyes, and became the woman they expected to see. In the living room, Lily and Sophie sat exactly where she had left them days before, their confidence radiating in the way they occupied the space. When Lily held out a pen, her hand steady and her smile practiced, Emily felt the urge to pull away. She forced her fingers to tremble slightly. She read the first page of the document, the ink dark and damning, and looked up at them with a vacant, trustful expression. "It is just a lot to process," Emily whispered, her voice carefully pitched to sound fragile. Lily leaned in, her eyes searching for any sign of doubt. Emily didn't blink. She pressed the pen to the paper, the scratch of the nib loud in the sudden silence of the room. She signed her name with a flourish, handing the document back to her sister. She walked to the kitchen, pouring a glass of water to hide the tightness in her jaw. Behind the scenes, Daniel was working. He traced every digital footprint, every illegal transfer, and every forged signature as it was uploaded to their network. The evidence was mounting into a mountain they would never be able to climb. Months bled into one another, a slow cycle of signing, waiting, and watching. Each week, Lily and Sophie grew bolder, their movements more fluid, their conversations centered entirely on the life they were systematically stripping away. Emily watched them from the periphery, noting the subtle shift in their tone from careful manipulation to open, greedy anticipation. They no longer whispered in the living room, they spoke openly, their voices filled with the intoxicating scent of an impending windfall. Emily played her part with cold precision, feigning hesitation when they presented documents, only to sign with a trembling hand that masked her absolute certainty. The house felt smaller, compressed by the weight of their unchecked ambition. Every signature Emily added to their stack of lies was a brick in the wall, closing them in. She tracked the date on her calendar, counting down to the final transfer. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the static electricity of a storm ready to break. Lily and Sophie were so focused on the horizon of their own gain that they failed to notice the floor beneath them had already turned to sand. The final document arrived on the table, thick and heavy with the promise of total control. They were ready to finish it. Lily slid the final document across the mahogany surface. It was the last piece of the puzzle, the deed that would legally erase Emily from her own life. Sophie stood behind her, one hand resting on the back of the chair, her gaze fixed on the paper with a hungry, predatory intensity. They were not even trying to hide their excitement anymore. Lily tapped the signature line with a manicured fingernail. "Just one more, Emily," she said, her voice dripping with a false saccharine sweetness. "Then we can finally put all this stress behind us." Sophie laughed, a low, sharp sound that cut through the room. She poured 2 glasses of wine, sliding one toward Lily. They clinked crystal, the chime ringing out like a funeral bell for Emily's past. They were so drunk on the power they thought they had seized that they didn't see Emily's hand reaching out. Emily took the pen, the weight of it feeling like lead. She looked at the paper, then at the 2 people who had spent months systematically tearing her world apart. She pressed the nib down. She signed. As the final stroke of ink dried, Lily let out a long, ragged breath, her eyes bright with the thrill of total, unearned victory. They had done it. They had won. The silence of the room lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the front door splintered. Not a knock, not a request, but a heavy, calculated impact that rattled the windows in their frames. Blue and red light flooded the living room, strobing against the walls like a frantic heartbeat. Lily dropped her glass. It shattered against the floor, red wine pooling like a dark stain across the carpet. Before she could scream, officers were inside, their movements precise and practiced. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly from the warmth of success to the freezing air of a prison cell. Sophie tried to scramble toward the papers, but an officer stepped firmly onto the documents, pinning them to the floor with a heavy boot. The thrill of victory vanished, replaced by the hollow, wide-eyed stare of total realization. They were not signing a future. They were signing their own indictment. Lily backed away until she hit the wall, her hands shaking, her mouth opening and closing without sound. The handcuffs clicked, a sharp, metallic bite that cut through the chaos. Within seconds, the room was no longer theirs. It was a crime scene. The system they thought they had built to trap Emily had instead become the cage that held them. The officers gripped the arms of Lily and Sophie, steering them toward the doorway. The transition from the living room to the hallway was forced, their heels dragging against the hardwood floor. Lily was struggling, twisting her shoulders, her face flushed with a mix of fury and disbelief. She caught sight of Emily standing by the fireplace and dug her heels in, forcing the officers to halt. Lily stared at her, her breathing ragged, her eyes searching Emily for some sign of weakness or confusion. She shouted, "Why didn't you stop us?" The question hung in the air, heavy and desperate. Emily didn't flinch. She stepped forward, the floorboards creaking under her steady weight, and looked directly into Lily's eyes. Her voice was quiet, devoid of anger, sharp as a blade. She said, "Because I wanted you to finish." The impact of the words hit Lily harder than the handcuffs. The fight went out of her. She slumped, the realization settling in that every move she had made was permitted. The officers pulled again, and this time, Lily did not fight back. She was led away into the dark, leaving nothing behind but the sound of the front door latching shut. The heavy click of the deadbolt echoed through the house. It was the first time in months the sound brought relief instead of dread. Emily walked through the living room, the space feeling larger, the air clearer. She picked up the shards of the broken wine glass, her movements deliberate, clearing the last remnants of the intrusion. She moved to the window and watched the red and blue lights fade into the distance until the street returned to its natural, quiet darkness. She sat in the armchair by the fireplace, the one where they had sat to divide her life between them. Now, it was just her. The house was cold, but it was hers. She had lost the version of the past she thought she knew, but she had reclaimed the future they tried to write for her. Betrayal had been the fire that burned away the illusions she once held. She closed her eyes and listened to the silence of the house. No more secrets, no more patterns, just the quiet hum of a life regained. She reached out, turned off the lamp, and allowed the dark to settle. She was the one who decided what happened next.